The first thing I saw when I came home from deployment was a woman I had never seen before standing in my kitchen, holding my mother's old coffee mug like she belonged there. I froze in the doorway, still wearing the uniform I had spent months dreaming of taking off, while she stared at me with tears already filling her eyes. Then she whispered the words that turned my entire world upside down. She asked, "Don't you recognize me?" I had spent nearly a year believing I knew exactly what waited for me at home, but in that moment, I realized that while I had been away serving my country, someone had been living inside the life I thought I had left behind. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel so more stories like this can reach people who need them. My name is Everett Callahan, and before deployment, I thought my life was simple. I was 38, divorced, and the father of a 9-year-old daughter named Maisie, who was the brightest part of every difficult day. My marriage had ended quietly after years of trying to repair something that neither my former wife nor I knew how to save, but Maisie had remained the one person who could make me laugh when I felt like life had become a collection of unfinished promises. Before leaving for deployment, I had arranged everything carefully. Maisie would stay with my older sister, Marjorie, during the final months, my house would remain locked and empty, and when I returned, I would finally have the chance to rebuild a normal life. I pictured small things more than anything else. Breakfast with Maisie. Taking her to school. Fixing the loose railing on the back porch. Sitting in my own living room without listening for alarms or wondering where the next call would come from. I didn't realize how badly I needed those ordinary moments until they were suddenly waiting for me. My return was earlier than expected. I had called Marjorie from the airport, and she promised she would bring Maisie to my house that afternoon. I drove through familiar streets with my heart pounding, noticing how everything looked both exactly the same and completely different. The grocery store was still on the corner. The old bookstore still had faded letters above the entrance. The maple trees along my street had grown fuller while I was gone. But when I unlocked my front door, the silence I expected wasn't there. There were fresh flowers on the table. A child's drawing was pinned to the refrigerator. A pair of small pink sneakers sat beside the hallway bench. And then I heard movement from the kitchen. The woman turned slowly when she saw me. She looked to be in her early 30s, with chestnut hair pulled loosely behind her shoulders and an expression that wasn't fear exactly, but something much more painful. She looked at me as if she had been waiting years for this moment. I instinctively stepped backward, my instincts immediately alerting me that something was terribly wrong. I asked who she was and why she was in my house, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, her eyes moved over my face, lingering on a faint scar above my eyebrow that I had gotten as a child. Then she reached toward a photograph sitting beside the coffee maker. It was an old photograph of me and my mother. The woman touched the frame with trembling fingers and said that she knew I wouldn't remember her. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and she claimed she had known my family when she was a little girl. According to her, my mother had taken care of her for several years when Clara's own family had been struggling. I stared at her, searching through memories I had buried so deeply that they felt like someone else's childhood. Then she mentioned something nobody outside my family should have known. She told me about a small blue bicycle my mother had given me when I was 7, and how I had cried because I thought the bicycle was too big for me. That memory struck with such force that I couldn't speak. Still, I didn't trust her. I demanded to know why she was in my house, and the answer hurt more than I expected. Clara explained that before my deployment, my mother had been secretly helping her. Clara had lost her job, had been struggling to care for her younger brother, and had nowhere stable to live. My mother had offered her temporary work managing the house while I was away, telling her that Everett would probably never agree to it if he knew the full story because he had always been fiercely protective of the people he loved. But my mother had passed away unexpectedly several months before my deployment, and Clara had been left with a promise she had made to her. She was supposed to protect something until I came home. I thought she meant the house. She meant Maisie. My stomach dropped. Clara explained that Marjorie had been overwhelmed caring for Maisie while also dealing with a difficult family situation that she hadn't told me about. Rather than allowing Maisie to be moved between relatives, Clara had stepped in. She had become Maisie's temporary caregiver with the approval of the necessary adults, and during the months I was gone, Maisie had grown deeply attached to her. Clara wasn't secretly occupying my home. She had been keeping it functional so Maisie could return to the only place that still felt like her father's home. But there was something Clara had not told me. Maisie had become terrified that I wouldn't come back. The child I remembered as fearless had been waking from nightmares, clutching an old photograph of me, and asking Clara nearly every morning whether soldiers sometimes disappeared forever. Clara had answered every question with patience, even when she herself was struggling. I wanted to be angry. It would have been easier if Clara had been some stranger who had broken into my house. It would have been easier if there had been a simple villain to blame. Instead, there was a woman standing in my kitchen who had spent months caring for my daughter while I had been thousands of miles away. Then Maisie came through the front door. She stopped when she saw me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she ran. I dropped everything and fell to my knees as she threw her arms around me. She cried so hard that her whole body shook, and I held her as tightly as I could, burying my face against her hair. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times, but none of those imagined reunions had prepared me for the sound of my daughter whispering that she had been afraid I had forgotten her. I told her I could never forget her. Then she looked over my shoulder at Clara. And she asked me not to make Clara leave. That request broke something inside me. I had spent months imagining that returning home would restore everything exactly as it had been. But Maisie wasn't the same little girl I had left behind. She had changed. She had learned how to live with uncertainty. She had learned that love could come from unexpected places. And Clara, despite being a stranger to me, had become part of the emotional bridge that carried my daughter through one of the hardest periods of her young life. Still, there were questions. I discovered that Clara had been struggling financially the entire time. She had turned down opportunities because she didn't want to leave Maisie without someone familiar. She had even used her own savings to repair a broken heating system in the house because she didn't want me returning to a home filled with problems. When I asked why she had done so much for people who weren't technically her responsibility, she gave me the simplest answer. My mother had once done the same for her. That afternoon, I found an envelope hidden inside an old drawer in my mother's desk. My name was written across the front in her handwriting. Inside was a letter explaining everything. My mother wrote that Clara had been the little girl she had once helped when no one else would. She wrote that people sometimes entered our lives for reasons we didn't understand until years later. She had watched Clara grow from a frightened teenager into a strong young woman, and she believed Clara had inherited something more valuable than money from those difficult years, the belief that kindness should be passed forward. My mother had asked Clara to look after Maisie if I ever had to leave. She had trusted Clara with the one thing she knew I loved more than anything. I sat at that desk for a long time, holding the letter against my chest. For the first time since returning, I cried. Not because I was angry. Because I finally understood that while I had believed I was protecting my family by serving far away, other people had been protecting them too. The following weeks were complicated. I had to relearn how to be a father in person rather than through phone calls and photographs. Maisie had grown used to Clara helping with homework, preparing meals, and listening when she was afraid. At first, I felt jealous of the bond they had formed. I hated admitting it, but part of me felt as though I had missed something that could never be returned to me. Clara noticed. Instead of becoming defensive, she slowly stepped back. She stopped making decisions for Maisie unless I asked her to. She began preparing to move into a small apartment she could barely afford. She told me that Maisie needed her father now, and she didn't want to interfere. That was when I realized my anger had been hiding something else. Fear. I was afraid that I had missed too much. Afraid that my daughter had learned to need someone else. Afraid that returning home didn't automatically make me the father I wanted to be. One afternoon, Maisie found me sitting on the back porch, staring at the repaired railing. She climbed beside me and told me something that I would remember for the rest of my life. She said Clara never tried to replace me. Clara had spent months telling her that her father loved her and that he would come home. She had kept every drawing Maisie made for me. She had marked the calendar each day until my return. Then Maisie handed me a box. Inside were dozens of small pictures, notes, and paper crafts she had made while I was away. Clara had saved every single one. I looked toward the kitchen window, where Clara was quietly washing dishes, and suddenly I couldn't see her as the stranger who had been standing in my kitchen anymore. I saw the person who had carried pieces of my family through a difficult season. So I did something I never expected to do. I asked Clara to stay. Not as an employee. Not as a replacement for anyone. As family. She cried before she could answer. Months passed, and our lives slowly became something none of us had planned. Clara found steady work at a local community center, where she helped children whose families were going through difficult circumstances. I began volunteering there on weekends with Maisie. We weren't perfect. There were awkward moments, disagreements, and days when grief returned without warning. But we learned to talk instead of running away. I also learned that forgiveness isn't always about forgiving someone else. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself. I had spent years blaming myself for my failed marriage. I had blamed myself for being away from Maisie. I had blamed myself for not knowing what was happening at home. But eventually I understood that love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence, honesty, and the courage to keep showing up. A year after I returned, we gathered in my mother's garden. The old blue bicycle from my childhood had been restored and placed beside the porch. Maisie had painted a small wooden sign for the garden. It read, "Kindness comes back around." Clara stood beside me while Maisie watered the flowers. I looked at the house where I had once walked through the door expecting to find my old life waiting for me. Instead, I had found a stranger. And somehow, that stranger had helped me find my family again. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before the story ends, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe the greatest lesson was, that kindness can return when we least expect it, that forgiveness can heal old wounds, or that family isn't always defined by blood but by the people who stay when life becomes difficult. As I watched Maisie laugh while Clara tried to keep up with her watering can, I finally understood the question Clara had asked me that first afternoon. "Don't you recognize me?" No, I hadn't recognized her. But sometimes the people who matter most arrive in our lives disguised as strangers. Sometimes home isn't the place you left behind. Sometimes home is the people who quietly kept a light burning until you found your way back. And sometimes the greatest second chance isn't being given another life. It's being given another chance to love the life you already have.